Hey everybody, it's LavenderTowne. And did you know that in Japan, it's not uncommon for mascots to be created for different areas and prefectures and towns, and we don't have that in America. So in order to rectify this, I'm going to be taking some of the most iconic places that I've ever been in America and making them this style of mascot. So the first city I wanted to make a mascot for was Lewiston, Idaho. I am going to do some cities that you've probably heard of before later, but I wanted to start off with something really specific and unlikely to be super relevant culturally. Lewiston is a city that is not super far from where I grew up, and it is a town that the whole town smells bad, and you might be thinking like, Haley, that's really mean. That's probably not true. But actually it is true because there's a big paper mill, and it makes everything smell kind of like this weird like wet dog smell, and you smell it in the entire town. Like the whole thing is set into a little like divot. You have to go down a long grade, your ears pop and everything when you drive down there, and the whole thing is just sort of like a big old pot of like papery stink. So I thought a cute idea would be like this half deer half skunk design. The skunk obviously to do with the smell and the deer to do with the biome. This is a sort of Pacific Northwest kind of area. When I say Idaho, I think a lot of people think Ohio, but Idaho is actually touching the Canadian border, and also like, you know, it's over by like Oregon and Washington. So I definitely thought a skunk and a deer combo would be very cute. A lot of the mascots that you see that I'm like referencing from Japan often have all kinds of different animals, sometimes combined together like this. Also humans and fictional creatures, and sometimes even objects. So I wanted to start with this sort of animal hybrid. I also gave it a little paper making tray. This is not how they make paper in Lewiston, but I thought it would be cute. This is, you know, how you would make paper in like a kindergarten class. So I definitely wanted this little mascot holding one of those like frames that you can make paper in. And I also gave them a little bib that has this design from the Nez Perce people. The Nez Perce were people who were indigenous to this area, and I even had a girl in my class growing up who was a Nez Perce. And you might be able to figure out why it's called Lewiston based on the fact that almost every year in history class we relearned the same unit on Lewis and Clark. It was apparently inspired by Lewis, like Lewistown or something like that. That's where the name supposedly comes from. I thought this mascot's pretty cute. I like the idea of a combo deer skunk. I really can't impress upon you hard enough that Lewiston is a town that really confronts your nostrils before anything else. There are some good things about Lewiston too. Every December they have a really big lights display that everyone can go to for free. And there's like, I don't know, there's a pretty good Costco there. But that's really all you need to know. Here's my little mascot for Lewiston. Oh, and of course you guys can absolutely name these mascots in the comments, and I will pick out the winners at a later date. Thank you to Paperlike for sponsoring this video. Paperlike is a screen cover for the iPad that creates the tactile sensation of paper on your tablet screen. I was really nervous to apply this myself to my iPad, but they luckily made it really easy by providing all the tools that you need and leaving detailed instructions on their website. Paperlike's newest release, Paperlike 2.1, features the same papery texture and stroke resistance with better screen clarity and visibility. When you're drawing or animating, the texture makes the drawing experience so much more satisfying. The texture is created with a technology called nanodots, micro beads that are uniformly arranged across the surface of the screen. This is the first screen protector I've ever used that provides such distinct texture while still leaving the display clear and with accurate color. I know in my case I am drawing and animating on my iPad more than ever, and having that little bit of paper texture on the screen makes the digital drawing experience so much more luxurious and fun. If you'd like to try out Paperlike, there's a link in the description. And thank you again to Paperlike for supporting the channel. Next up, of course, I had to make a mascot for where I'm living now, and that would be sunny Los Angeles, also commonly known as LA. It is a city that I have grown very fond of, but it's also very popular to hate on as well. It's the home of old Hollywood as well as like new influencer culture, but also, importantly, a lot of other culture as well. It is a total melting pot. Naturally, for the animal inspiration, I definitely had to do a coyote. I definitely feel like in a city like Los Angeles, you don't feel a lot of like animal presence necessarily because there are so many people. Usually all you're really seeing are, some birds and stuff like that. But even where I live, which is pretty in the mix, I have seen a coyote cross my path, and they are just very resilient, interesting animals, and I think that they could really easily embody the spirit of Los Angeles. It is the second most populous city in the entire United States, and obviously the most populous in California. There are roughly 3.9 million residents within the city limits. So this is a very, very big city indeed, which is why I feel like whenever someone says LA is one thing or another, or if they hate or love it, I always wonder about that because it is such a large city that I feel like it feels very different depending on where you are. So because Los Angeles is really like, city of angels, I definitely wanted to add some angel wings onto our cunning little coyote. And I made the wings out of highway, out of interstate, because famously LA has horrible traffic and crazy car culture. I will say one of the most tragic things about this city is that almost every day it is 70 degrees, sunny and beautiful, and there is no way to thrive as a pedestrian, which are two facts that should never go together. I have forced my way into being a pedestrian and also a cyclist, like riding my bike, but it does feel like I'm taking my life into my hands, and it is kind of a bummer. So I definitely had to incorporate that like mandatory car culture into this design somewhere. I of course had to give a nod to the old Hollywood thing. Obviously Hollywood is a cultural landmark around the entire world, and that is just a portion of Los Angeles. So we definitely had to add some of that. I really do think that thinking of LA as a influencer area is a kind of small view of what the city is really like. You're only going to see that in a couple of places, whereas there are a lot of enclaves where different cultures have really built a long and historic sort of community. And I think reducing it down to a bunch of like Instagrammers taking pictures of themselves is kind of reductive. But I digress. I really love how this little mascot turned out. I definitely wanted to keep in the glamour but also the ruggedness of LA, and I think that this coyote can kind of do both. Definitely interested to hear the name that you guys think would be right for this little guy. Next up, I had to do the most populous city in America, which is, of course, New York. I have been to New York City a couple times, so I'm definitely not as familiar with it as these other cities that I have discussed, but I absolutely could not leave New York out. I've been there more recently for a book event I did at the Strand last year, as well as for like personal travel. And I will say that having been to upstate New York, I do think that I really like the nature and the vibrancy of other parts of the state more than I actually like the city, and that might just be sort of an introvert kind of thing. I think I do better in Los Angeles primarily just because everything's a bit more spread out. New York is one of the most frenetic places I've ever been, and that's even considering the fact that I used to live like a couple minutes away from Shinjuku Station, which is is actually the busiest train station in the world. Still, I find that less stressful going there all the time than I do walking around in many places in New York City. And I think it's just kind of the culture there. I feel like everyone's very annoyed with tourists there, and so I'm constantly worried about getting in the way. But anyway, New York is obviously a culturally very important city. I definitely wanted to include their nature, which to me is rats and pigeons. Now, this may sound kind of like a dig at New York, but it's quite the opposite, and anyone who knows me would know that, because rats are actually one of my favorite animals. I have had pet rats over the years. I had one named Pocket, who I loved dearly when I was a child, and then I had two, Parsnip and Clove, for about 3 years, who, yeah, I love them. They're wonderful pets. Anyway, I have a great softness and a fondness for these types of animals who are so social and so misunderstood. Every pigeon is a feral pigeon. This is a fact that I think not a lot of people know, but all pigeons that you see on the street were once designed to be carrier pigeons or, pet pigeons, and that's why they do so well around humans and you don't see them out in the forest. I think that kind of has an interesting parallel with New York. I think this idea that New York is a place that's hard to thrive, but because of that, there are some really incredible and talented people who live there. Because if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere, and that kind of concept. I also decided to try to put in more objects and symbols in this design, since I felt like I was going a little too Animal Crossing mode on the previous two, just with an animal and some clothes or whatever. So I decided to make the rat ears into bagels because, of course, we need to give credit to the iconic New York bagel. And I will say that much of the hype is real. I have had some of the most incredible bagels I've ever eaten, specifically in New York. So I hate to say it, but it's absolutely true. And of course, I had to add some pizza as well because, pizza rat. Next up, I'm going to make a mascot for Seattle, and I knew immediately that I wanted to use an orca as their sort of mascot or symbol. I just think that the orcas that live around Seattle are so cool. I'm hugely into the punk rock energy of orcas and Seattle, and I thought they'd go together. Punk has a huge history in Seattle, and protest and all that stuff. It's kind of in the DNA of this city. So I thought it made sense also to have the orca, not only because they live next to Seattle in their ocean, but also because orcas have been beating up some fishing boats, and it just reminds me of punk rock. I don't know. I made this connection. I also wanted to give the orca a little guitar. Again, Seattle is such a music city. I think that there's so many bands that went on to become famous that got their start in Seattle. And I've spent a tremendous amount of time here. This was kind of the really major city that I grew up closest to, and I would always go there once a year to go to the anime convention they have there, SakuraCon. So I have spent a lot of time in this city. One of my favorite parts of the city is Fremont, where there's just a lot of weird, cool stuff like arcades, and there's a giant troll that lives under the bridge. Yeah, it's just a cool place. I wanted to add at the end of the guitar this little sort of Space Needle thing, because the Space Needle, of course, is the most iconic part of the Seattle skyline. Though I will say, in a lot of major cities I've been to, there's something that looks an awful lot like the Space Needle, which I always think is funny. Calgary has a Space Needle adjacent tower, and there's Tokyo Tower, Skytree, but my first sort of introduction to this style of observatory building was the Space Needle, and I think for a lot of people that's still true. So I still think that this sort of belongs to Seattle in some ways. You might be wondering why this orca has two tails. This is my sort of stealth nod to the fact that Starbucks started in Seattle. It is one of Seattle's biggest claims to fame, so I had to incorporate that somewhere, and the two tails is in reference to the two-tailed siren that is the mascot for Starbucks. I was originally going to have coffee coming out of the blowhole of this orca, but then I thought that was just too nasty and would not really read well. I had a lot of trouble actually fitting in all the little details and nods that I wanted to, and this was an interesting challenge because a lot of the mascots that I was using as my inspiration are relatively simple designs. They're not super cluttered, so I couldn't go Final Fantasy mode and add a million belt buckles and little details wherever I wanted. I had to really reduce it down to its simplest form. All right, so here are my 4 mascots that I designed for American cities. Let me know what you thought of this, and if you have any names for these 4, please let me know. And if you have any towns or cities you think I really need to cover, please let me know in the comments. I will see you guys in the next one. A huge thank you to all of my patrons, including Grexius, Olia, Liddy Savior, Roro, Rayons, Vorpalmat, Brandon Stark, CB, Crosby F, Lucy Yamajiki, Live Live, Salty Jackrabbit, Ravens Crow, Saucelot, Tea Hill Music, Jabber Dabber Doo, Kadaria, Deadly Nightshade Art, Astral Fox Art, The Expressive Poker Face, Subaki, Cutie Pie, Ruined Raincrow, Ice Cream Pal, Cola, JJ Jade, and of course, Lib 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 Lib.